him in his path. He called unto Abraham. He made Abraham answer him. And he said, Lord, here am I. He called to David. He's calling to you. He's calling to you. He's wanting you to answer the call. He knows you by name. Your names, just like you was born on a birth certificate and put there, he knows them. They're in his book, the Lamb's Book of Life. Just exactly. And before you was ever thought about, and before your mama was born, your daddy was born, before your grandparents were born, did you know your name was already in there?
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, your names was already in that Lamb's Book of Life. That book was finished. This book was finished. It was already written and in a predetermined state of God's mind. What happened? When time started in the garden with Adam and Eve, when time started, they lived in that garden, and we don't know how long they lived there. They could have lived there by man's years, 10,000 years. There's no evidence disputing it. Time just was not evident. They were not aging.
There weren't 24 hours in a day back then.
It wasn't no time on time. There wasn't no 24-hour days. Wasn't no 7-day weeks. There weren't no 365-day years. That time was, but there was no time as we know. Minutes, seconds, hours, months, days. No, that time did not exist. Adam did not have an expiration date. When you're born, you have an expiration date.
Amen.
You're going to die. It's predetermined in the foreknowledge of God. Just as sure as you was born, you're going to die. Unless you're the last few on earth here that make and complete the church of God that is going to be taken out of here in the last moment of time, the last twinkling of an eye, Paul said.
Amen.
You see, time was not in effect as we know it. It wasn't like we elect our governors and stuff for 4 years, 8 years, whatever. It wasn't like it we would have rule and reign for certain periods of time. It wasn't like we go to work at the age of 21 and at the age of 35 we're going to change jobs and then we're going to work to 55. All of that was not even in the planning. It was not even in God's vocabulary. Jesus told his people when he walked with them in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, take no thought of tomorrow. That's how your time could be. And, you know, we could just be boisterous and we could be full of pride and challenge God to that and say, I'll bet you I'm here tomorrow. But I don't know the idiot that would do it, but there's probably some around. Argue with God about the time that God is going to allow them. But anyway, see what took place back here in the beginning. As these books, they were closed. This one had 7 seals put on it. A seal, a seal, a seal, a seal, a seal, and a seal. They were sealed, and no one had the power, the authority to tear one of them seals off and see what was written in here. From that place back there to this first seal, what was revealed, what took place, what all things that God was going to allow out of his mind of secrets, his mind of what he had set in order under that first seal. And then the second seal, what came out of it when God removed that dispensation. This is all in Revelation. John saw these things. John is understanding. John puts it this way. He said, I was in heaven one day, and he said, there was a book laying on the altar, and he said, I was looking for someone to come up and open the book. And it had 7 seals on it. And he said, no one in heaven or earth could open this book.
Amen.
See, the 7 seals that God put on it would be 7 dispensations of time. And what took place from Adam and Eve and through Noah, and then through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and King David, and King Solomon, and all of that brings us up to Jesus at the 4th seal.
Is there anything in the Bible that says what God chose, like numbers, like seven days, the 7 seals, 7 is used a lot, 12 is used a lot, 40 is used a lot, but is there any reference as to why he used those numbers?
Well, that book right there is so complicated that our mind will never, ever figure it out in this life. I'm going to tell you something. The scriptures are put together so intricately, they're like a puzzle. And them portraying something that is a hidden message that was at a higher level. And that message that is revealed coming from God has a message not of the carnality of earthly, fleshly things, but of the spiritual things that come down from heaven. Remember we read Deuteronomy 29 here a while back? You remember what it said? You know what it said?
The hidden secrets God kept.
It says the secret things belong unto God. But the things that have been revealed, that means unveiled, belong to us. That means that God had the secrets all contained, and then he began in time dispensation to reveal. And that's why we have it. Look, you go back here, Genesis 1. Do you know who wrote that book? Moses. But Moses will not live here. He will not live until all of the things that we know as Adam and Eve and Noah and the flood, and until all of the things of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then 430 years we have this man named Moses. 2,400 years Moses back here writes of the things that we have in our first book of our Bible. Why? Dispensations. Time as God saw fit to reveal. But man ain't got nothing to do with this. Man can't figure these things out. Man just keeps reading and flipping the pages and going and trying to find a different way, trying to find some other solution than what it actually says. And man is looking in the wrong direction. I heard this song coming up here. Help me get back, Lord, to where I was. Help me get down on my knees. That's where it all begins.
Well, ain't that the reason the Bible's been revised? Because man doesn't understand what's written in the King James Version, so he tries to translate it into something that the average Joe, can understand and wrap his hands around.
Religion is God's enemy.
Amen.
Religion was devised cleverly, smartly, intelligently, and deceivingly by Satan. God never had nothing to do with no religion. This book does not point to any denomination. It never reveals any religion. There's not one in it.
It doesn't mention denomination in the Bible.
Does not. There's only one word that pertains to God, our Savior, Redeemer, and Creator, to mankind as we being His creation. And that one word is salvation. You've got to go through Jesus to obtain salvation. Jesus is not the pastors of all these denominations and all of these religions. Jesus has not got anything to do with those things that exalt themselves against what He did on the cross. The cross of Calvary, what Jesus accomplished, the feat that He came into the world to do at a dispensation of 4 seals or 4,000 years, 4 days with God. What He came in the world to do on the cross will never ever be superseded. It will never ever point to another gospel. The only gospel made for mankind and mankind's redemption was given to the Apostle Paul. It was not given to Moses through the law. It was not given to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It wasn't given to any mankind to be specifically held within that group of people. Like the Jews. They considered themselves to be a blessed people. They considered themselves to be the only people of God. But they're still looking for a Savior. They're still looking for a Redeemer. They think that Jesus Christ was just another prophet or another man of God that intervened at that moment. They haven't received Him of whom you and the way that you should be recognizing Him. You recognize Jesus just the way Paul said in the book of Ephesians and Galatians and Colossians also, where Christ was the image of the invisible God, made manifest, that came down and walked among men, who manifested His life of good works, of love toward His creation, and gave His life on the cross of Calvary. Listen, the world ain't received that.
Nope.
We think, that everybody has heard this, No, they ain't heard this. They ain't heard this message. The gospel of grace, where there's not one thing required of the believer. Not one thing. He never demands nothing. He never commands nothing. He never expects nothing. Only thing in the relationship of when Christ comes within you is that you then are becoming obedient to someone that is motivating your soul and your spirit. Not to the flesh out here. John said we're in this world, but we absolutely cannot be a part of it. All that's in the world is the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Now that's what we're to avoid. Whosoever does them things, they're not of God. That's what John said in Little John back here, first chapter of Little John. We have to take God at whom God is and then allow ourselves to be brought under subjection to what God intends and purpose. And if you will look that word, write that word purpose down. That word purpose, everything in creation had a purpose. I'm telling you, it's mind-boggling. But there was nothing just made out here that was made of uselessness, of something that could not be fit for nothing. Everything in creation, even every person that had ever been born, was assigned a purpose. Whether they performed that purpose we have to wait and remain to see whether that will be fulfilled. Whether every individual fulfills his purpose that God called and chose him to do, it remains to be seen. But in our life, to know the things of godliness, to choose the things of godliness, to make your life just without regard to the things that has been set in our realm out here to carry us away. That's all this is out here for. A lot of it is for your purpose, to sustain your life. But a lot of it is unnecessary. And a lot of it is unfit. And a lot of it takes a hold of you and motivates us through an addiction or through some attraction or through something that we had control of but we lost. That we let it get out of control, and God will help us do anything that we ask. It does not matter. Listen, I was an alcoholic for 7 years. I know what alcoholics do. I know what alcoholism is. I know the things, the pressures in life and on your family and things that it puts on you. But the night that I gave my heart to Jesus on my knees at an altar, everything changed. It didn't take months of rehab. It didn't take thousands and thousands of dollars of needles and things to bring me down. It didn't. It took one thing, Jesus. And I ain't saying that everybody is going to have the same experience that I had. But 39 years ago, I had an experience that has never, ever left me. And don't matter what I'm doing, the presence of Him in my thoughts is never no more than a blink of an eye. Don't matter what I'm doing. Don't matter what I'm working at. Don't matter what I'm having pleasure doing. It don't matter where I am positioned on this earth. It's because God had a purpose in my life. And I wasn't living up to that purpose at 27 years old and having 3 children and was an alcoholic and a gambler. And I like to fight and I like to knock around. I like to do a lot of things that men did. But was all that in God's plan? No. You see, through life, before the intervention of the Holy Ghost in my life, before God crossed into my path and told me, Bobby, it's your time. That's exactly the way it happened.
But sometimes don't you gotta hit rock bottom before you can, couldn't that be part of God's plan too?
Well,
for you to hit rock bottom before you can come back up?
No, not necessarily. It's not God's intention for you to be poor. It's not God's intention for you to be desperate for food and water. You make God look weak. When I say I'm dependent on God, well, if I lacked any of that necessity, it would look like I'm either failing God or God's failing me. And I couldn't belittle God by any whatsoever. Now, if some people may, like you went to that tent revival, but you didn't hear that old guy's testimony from what island I say? But anyway, he was from a foreign island. And he was giving his testimony of what all he lost before he gained anything. And it was a touching testimony, and it sure was. It's like every great man of God. Moses was born as a Hebrew. The Hebrew children were under the authority to be killed by the Pharaoh because of the prophecy that they had heard about a king, and that king was going to come out of the Hebrews. So every Hebrew male was killed from the space of about firstborn plumb back to 5 or 6 years old. Well, you remember that. Well, that happened to Moses. Moses' mama took him, put him in a little basket, set him out in the Nile River, floated down, got caught in some cattails, got in there, and there Pharaoh's daughter comes out, goes out there and sees it and brings it in. Now you think all this is coincidence?
No,
It was all predestinated. He was the one, the man of the hour that would come, that them prophets was talking about. And he came right on time, right in the dispensation, right in his generation. And for 40 years, when she took him in and raised him as her son, he was raised with all the glory of Egypt. Pharaoh owned it all. Moses wanted for nothing. Everything in his life was provided, the best, the very, 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 very best. He lacked nothing. And when Moses then is revealed by one little trademark of a Hebrew blanket that his mama had wove and put in that basket. And Hebrew had their colors, just like we have American flag and everybody else got a flag. Well, the Hebrews had colors and things that represented. That's the same thing about this book. Numbers represent something. All of the things of this, they all tie together in the wisdom and the knowledge of God. Ask him 1,000 things at one time and he will answer you, but whether you hear him and pay attention. He knows how many stars is up there. He knows how many galaxies he's made. He knows the number of mankind from the first page of the Lamb's Book of Life to the last page. He knows the last name on it. And he knows them all by name. He named them before they was born. He named them before they were ever created in their dispensation, in their time. We as people, like Moses was, for 40 years, he was the second man in Egypt. All right? Then all of a sudden, when the Pharaoh finds out Moses' identity, and Moses finds out that he's got a mama and a daddy out in them slaves up there that have worked and toiled all their life, he wants to go meet them. He goes out there. He finds his mama. He finds his daddy. He finds his brothers and sisters in true natural life. So then he's faced with a choice. And the scripture says that he chose to suffer affliction and persecution with the children of God rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. That's Moses' statement. He chose to go and suffer persecution and be in slavery himself than to live in the wealth of Pharaoh and all of Egypt. Egypt was all his when Pharaoh died. He was going to give it to him and not his real son, not his only son of the flesh. But at the end of that 40 years, Pharaoh took Moses and he put him out at the backside of the desert of Egypt, where they had pillars set that showed that this was Egypt and that over there was something else, and that's as far as they went. But anyway, Moses retreats. He's given provision for 7 days, where he probably knew it would take 30 days to get across that desert, Pharaoh did. He just knew that he wasn't going to have Moses' blood on his hand, so he set him out with that provision of 7 days, food and water. And Moses went out across that desert, and lo and behold, some way or another, he lived long enough to reach the backside of it on Mount Sinai. And there, when he come to, there was 7 women who was shepherds shepherding no other thing than sheep. Sheep Pharaoh hated, Egypt hated. They did not like raising sheep. They didn't have no sheep. Everything they had was camels, horses, bullocks, everything but sheep. They didn't like sheep. Moses finds himself for the next 40 years among this household of 7 women, and he finds himself becoming a shepherd of sheep. And of another 40 years, first 40 in Egypt, second 40 in the desert. But in the second 40-year period of time at the end, God spoke to Moses and said, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to go in to Pharaoh's house and tell him to let my people go. That's just exactly what Moses did. At 80 years old, he sojourned back through the desert where he had come from and went into Pharaoh. And now the old Pharaoh is dead, and it's the Pharaoh whom he was in rivalry with to accept and become the ruler of in Egypt that is going to judge him. And he just laughs and mocks. He laughs and mocks. He went up there with nothing but a staff. That's all. When Moses goes in, makes these demands, makes these requests that God has told him, they just laugh it off and they scorn Moses to shame. But what happened? God told Moses to go back. He told him a certain series of things to do. The Lord worked 10 miracles. Worked 10 miracles. The last one would be the one that when the death angel passed through the land that night, they had killed a lamb. They had killed that lamb and cooked it and put the blood at the doorpost up on the top and the lintel. And that lamb, when they began to eat it, along about midnight, the death angel became through that land. And every household, every person, didn't matter whether they was Egyptian or Hebrew, every person that night, the firstborn of every house died that did not have that blood. All this is a parable. That's a hidden message right there in that today should live in here. That if we're not covered with the blood and you're the house where God lives, and if God don't see the blood on you, you won't go with him. But what happened? Moses lived 3 40-year generations. He takes the Hebrew slaves back out of Egypt, and he takes them over to the place where God said, and they're walled in by mountains on one side and by the water on the other side. They can't get out. And here's Pharaoh's army pursuing them on horses with shields and swords and spears and bows and arrows. And here they are with nothing to fight with. But God. That's it. But God. They wasn't going to lift a finger. That's another parable. They wasn't going to do any work. They weren't going to rise up and be any big soldiers like David killing Goliath. They weren't going to lift a finger. Not one finger would they lift in this battle. Why? Because it belonged to God. God's provision. God's protection. So what happened? They were walled up against the water. God just divided the water. They walked through not in mud, not in muck and mire. They walked through on dry ground. And as the population is computerized and brought up to that dispensation, there was about 3 million Jews estimated on the earth that walked through that Red Sea. Got out to the other side. They, no doubt, were a little afraid, walking through water that was probably 500 feet deep, that God had just moved back. I know I'd be a little bit scared to walk through there. But as they assessed to do it, proceeded to do it, all of them entered in and went out the other side. And Pharaoh's army, on their horses and their mighty men, started down the same path. Do you know what happened? The walls fell in.
The door shut, just like it's going to do in the end time.
You see what happened? God destroyed every enemy of the Hebrews. Their horses, all of the mighty men of his soldiers, all of them were drowned in that water that fell in on them. What's that a sign of? This is a sign of those that whom God chooses and whom they respond are obedient. He saved them. They walked out on dry ground. And Apostle Paul takes this in the book of Corinthians. He said that Pharaoh and his army proceeded, but they weren't going forth by faith. It was by faith that the Hebrews walked through there. Faith. God is looking for faith in every believer. Not works. He don't expect you to fight one battle. He expects you to give it to Him. And by faith, trust it. Stand on it. Believe it. He is Jehovah Jireh, our provider. He will take care of us. He doesn't want us to be poor, helpless, never having nothing. That ain't what God's wish is. God's wish is that you know who He is and you worship Him in spirit and in truth.
Amen.
Then all of the things that come on your behalf later are just a benefit from God to you. It's a gift. That's all. Paul said that God intended for us to prosper and be in health, even as our soul prospers. The more we understand our great closeness of God that we can have, that if we get in this book and search out these hidden mysteries and these hidden secrets, and we're not into the first seal, the second seal, we're not in the third seal, we're not in the fourth seal, we're not in the fifth seal now. We're over here in the sixth seal. We need to be searching out the deep mysteries of God. We need to have eyes that we can look and behold the world of how they're carried away and what they're after. It's all wealth and riches and materialism. It's all about things of the flesh. They're making provisions and laying up in store for the flesh. I'm not looking and laying up my treasures on this earth. If I just have sufficient today, I'll thank God. And if I live tomorrow, I'm perfectly able and willing to accept what God lays on my plate. Because I just know how the Lord is. I know how the world is. For 39 years, I have walked by faith. And by that I mean I walked a lot of times with nobody but the Lord. My family wasn't with me. Not my immediate family. I'm not talking about my two children.